Hi, my name's Chris. Welcome to my studio. Or should I say, my bedroom. I think my studio is so cold today that maybe even the paint has frozen in it. I'm going to try to improve my artistic skills today by making a reproduction of a painting by a famous artist called Henri Matisse. The painting, or rather a mixed media piece, is called Blue Nude.
In the early 1950s, Henri Matisse created a new set of works called the Blue Nudes. They were a set of lithographs, basically paper cutouts stuck on more paper and then mounted on canvas. The Blue Nudes are an quintessential Matisse piece. The solid blue colour, the liquid form of pose by the model, they all reminiscent of an earlier painting of his called The Joy of Life. Unfortunately, later in life, Henri Matisse suffered from stomach cancer and had many serious operations which left him bedridden. That didn't stop him from continuing his creative career. Of course, by this time, 1950, he was already very famous as one of the founders of the Fauvism movement. It's reported that Matisse spent up to 2 weeks in bed with his notebooks and pencils, sketching out his ideas for the Blue Nude series. That's a lot of dedication to art. I worked hard to try to get some pleasing shapes and forms based on Matisse's originals, but I'm afraid I really struggled there, even with copying over again my more successful efforts. I never really got the poetry of the physical form like Matisse does. My drawing skills are little used, and I don't really have much hope of being able to compete with a man who could sketch a church in Tuscany in less than 30 seconds and capture its entire essence. After several attempts of trying to create drawings that had some kind of poetry, I decided that there was an easier approach, so I asked my beautiful wife to pose for me nude so I could take a photograph and then use that digitally as some kind of template from which I could copy the short shapes and forms that I needed. I was no longer being true to myself, but I was at least being true to my own laziness. Now it was time to make the cutouts, and I decided to use Arch's watercolour paper. This is the 300 GSM cold press watercolour paper, very popular with watercolour artists. It's thick and quite gorgeous. And on that paper I decided to paint the blue using acrylics. This is the closest thing that I have to what Matisse used, which is gouache. Gouache is some kind of watercolour paint that's opaque and quite matte in its finish, very similar to the kind of paint that in school we called poster paint. Now it was time to transfer the drawing, as such as they were that I made, over onto the blue paper, just getting here things the right way round. And then I'm going to use an old trick that I learned many years ago, using this little lump here of solid pencil lead, a little graphite pencil lead. And so basically you just rub on the wrong side of your drawing, and just basically you're making something which will transfer across in a second when you do the outline on the other side of the paper. Be a pretty messy little step this. You'll find your fingers covered in graphite dust by the end of it. Now we've flipped over the paper, and we're going to just tape it down here, keep it still while we're doing the sketching on the back side. Here I'm going to use quite a hard ballpoint pencil to sketch the forms. And as I draw, of course, the graphite on the other side will be transferred to the clean side of the blue paper. Some of the form shapes are rather good, I think, and others, well, now let's say they're not so good and are going to require a little bit further refinement as we go on. I have a sneaking suspicion that Henri Matisse didn't really need to worry about this kind of transferring. He probably just sketched straight onto the blue paper and was happy with the result immediately.
We know from Matisse's notebooks that he had quite a lot of trouble marrying together dominant and contrasting colours, and this is why he sort of ended up using single solid slabs of colour, like this bright blue, to render his paintings. And this technique became very well known as the movement called Fauvism. In this early picture, called Woman with Hat, from about 1905, we can already see that the young Matisse was fascinated by bright colours. Okay, now it's time to start cutting out the shapes, and I'm going to use an old pair of workshop scissors that have been around for a few years now. I am definitely not going to be using my wife's dressmaking scissors. Oh no. Once we have all the pieces, we can start to assemble them and see what we've got. This is the first time we really get an overview of how the pieces will fit together and the effect that makes. And I think the first thing that becomes apparent is that I made a fundamental error in trying to copy Matisse's style, and I've given my wife's cutout a bald head, removing her beautiful hair. We're going to have to fix that problem. To assemble the cutouts, Matisse, who of course was bedridden, had his assistants move the pieces around and affix them on the wall. And apparently he had a 4-meter long stick with which to direct their actions. Finally, after some more cutting and recutting and redrawing, we have the components ready for assembly. Here I've taken some watercolor paper and I've given it a fine wash of burnt sienna and yellow ochre. You can see one side is mottled and speckled and the other side is a smoother creamy color. And here I have a nice bright white passepartout to highlight the finished painting. I'm going to use some PVA glue, which actually was invented in the early 1950s, so perhaps is actually what Matisse would have used. And I've got a few other materials to help me with the final assembly.
So here we have the finished piece, nestling on a bed of Swedish permafrost. I'm very happy with the outcome. I've made the cutout overlap slightly to the passepartout. I think that gives a nice effect, and I'm very happy with how the silhouette and the hairline has come out. I think this is quite true to Matisse's original work. I hope he would have liked it.